This week on Vaticano, Pope Francis visits the Agricultural Agency of the United Nations in Rome. Learn with us about the Christian origins of Halloween and discover the Museum of the Souls of Purgatory in Rome. For this and more, Vaticano starts now. Before the Angelus prayer on Sunday, October the 22nd, Pope Francis explained the gospel of the day. In the passage, the disciples asked Jesus if they should pay taxes. Jesus answered that they should pay unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God.
The Christian is called to be concretely committed in human and social realities, without putting God and Caesar in contraposition. Counterposing God and Caesar would be a fundamentalist attitude.
The Holy Father said that the Christian is called to be engaged in earthly realities, with that enlightenment that can only come from God. After the Angelus prayer, Pope Francis recalled the beatification of some 109 members of the Claretian congregation from Barcelona, Spain. They were killed for their faith at the beginning of the last century.
May their heroic example and their intercession support Christians who also in our days, and there are so many, suffer discrimination and persecutions in different parts of the world.
Unusual pilgrims came to greet the Pope at the Wednesday General Audience. October the 18th is International Guide Dogs Day. It was established in 2006 by the Italian Union of the Blind and Visually Impaired. The idea was born to celebrate the precious role of these specially trained animals in the lives of people with visual impairments. For Annalisa, her dog Miranda is much more than a personal friend.
It's a beautiful relationship and full of affection as well, because he's a real companion for life, a real four-legged friend, and a true guardian angel.
These dogs enjoy more rights and freedoms than any other animal in Italy. Italian law guarantees them free access to public places, transportation, and even churches. And so, in St. Peter's Square, 78 guide dogs walked with their masters to greet the Pope. On October the 22nd, the Church celebrates World Mission Day. For the occasion, the Vatican's news service called Fides, for the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, prepared this video to remember Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, patroness of missionaries. October the 16th is World Food Day, and Pope Francis spoke out at the FAO, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, which is based in Rome.
The initiatives that are being implemented are many and praiseworthy. However, they are not enough. It is urgent to continue to promote new efforts and to finance programs to combat hunger and structural poverty in a more effective and promising way.
It was back in 1945 when a lot of people were suffering from hunger and nearly 60 million people were displaced worldwide. A humanitarian catastrophe that challenged governments of the time to create an agricultural sector at the United Nations. Today, however, the world is living an even greater humanitarian crisis. More than 65 million people are displaced, about 800 million live in hunger, and roughly 250 million are migrants.
In the light of this, reflecting on the effects of food security on human mobility means returning to the commitment that gave rise to the FAO in order to renew it.
The theme of the day was Change the Future of Migration, invest in food security and rural development. The Holy Father said that the relationship between hunger and migration can only be addressed by looking at the roots of the problem, which are conflicts and changes to do with extreme weather.
For some, it would be enough to reduce the number of mouths to feed and in this way solve the problem. But it is a false solution when we think of the levels of food waste and models of consumption that squander many resources. Reducing is easy. Sharing, instead, demands conversion, and this is imperative.
Pope Francis suggested adding the category of love to the language used on the international scene. This category of love would include terms such as gratuitousness, equal treatment, solidarity, a culture of gift, brotherhood, and mercy.
To love means to contribute so that every country increases its production and reaches food self-sufficiency.
As a symbol of his visit, Pope Francis gave the UN Food Agency a marble sculpture as a present. The sculpture features a weeping angel over the little Syrian boy, Aylan, one of many who drowned in the waters of the Mediterranean Sea. In a few moments, we'll be back with more on Vaticano. More on Vaticano begins now.
My report this time is a bit different than usually because I had the opportunity to interview Sheikh Imran Hossein, a friend who visited me here at the UN Geneva. He's a prominent Islamic scholar from Trinidad. Many years ago, he was the Imam in Long Island and he led the weekly Friday prayers at the UN headquarters in New York.
And I was required to go to the United Nations headquarters in Manhattan once a month on the day of Friday, the day of the congregational prayer. And the Secretary General gave us the largest hall in the building, which was his reception hall. So my stay in New York for those 10 years at the United Nations headquarters in Manhattan was very beneficial for me for understanding the world today.
Before our interview, we gave Imran a short tour of the UN building. And while Imran recognizes the world of today, he exposes that the appearance and the actual reality are quite different from each other.
Because there are so many in the world today who have eyes and yet cannot see. And as a consequence, they respond to me with shock and with discomfort. And that's why there are so many in the world today who have this particular attitude towards me, but not only to me. To all those, whether you be Christian or Jew or Hindu or Buddhist or Muslim, who seek to penetrate the reality of the world today and then to expose that reality.
Imran also participated in many interfaith dialogues with Christian and Jewish scholars while representing Islam in the USA in the early 90s. He believes that today we are most certainly living in the end time.
And we are now on the verge of the greatest war of all in history. And I remember Pope Francis meeting with the head of the Orthodox Christian Church, and both of them, the leaders of this side of Christianity and that side of Christianity, both made a declaration warning about the Great War which is coming and seeking to try to avoid that Great War. I remember that declaration of Pope Francis in Cuba. That Great War is part of the end time. The Christian knows it as Armageddon. The Muslim knows it as the Malhama. And that Great War is going to substantially reduce the population of the world. We in Islamic eschatology not only know about the Great War, but we know what's going to happen after the Great War. And I was pleasantly surprised to find in Christian eschatology that you also have the same view of the conquest of Constantinople, after which the Antichrist will appear in person.
Imran Hossein has also worked for several years in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. In 1985, he gave up his job to devote his life to the mission of Islam, and he would love to meet Pope Francis.
I would very much love to meet with the leaders of the Roman Catholic Church for a dialogue on eschatology. We need to have Christian, Muslim, Jewish dialogue, not just on what is similar between our religions and what is different, but more importantly, a dialogue on eschatology, on the end time. If I can meet with the Pope or with his representatives for the Catholic Church, the Protestants, the Orthodox Christians, and dialogue on the subject, it would be fascinating.
Speaking of the end times, from an eschatological, theological point of view, Imran said that he believes that we are living, as he called it, in the late afternoon of time.
We got to look for the ones who truly live the religious way of life. And these must come together, and I'm grateful to you, Christian, for this opportunity to share with you these views, which I hope will now reach to the Roman Catholic Church wherever this program is viewed, and that they may respond positively.
To interview and spending the day with this wise man was truly edifying, and indeed, according to Pope Francis, with Islam, dialogue is progressing well.
Thank you, Christian.
Thank you. God bless you.
Yes.
Halloween has now become an important international celebration in October of every year. Bats and pumpkins decorate the windows and shelves of many stores. And children dress up in the costumes of their favorite heroes. Now, have all of us at some point wondered whether Halloween is an appropriate feast to remember for Catholics? Celebrations that involve costumes and partying often drift into pagan-like rites. Should parents let their kids go trick-or-treating? Are they worshipping the devil or pagan gods when they wear Gothic costumes? To find out more about the origins of Halloween, we met with professor and priest Father John Walk at the Holy Cross University in Rome. What we've learned from Father Walk has been an amazing discovery.
The holiday of Halloween is actually one of the most Catholic holidays in the entire calendar, because it comes from the word for holy. Hallow means holy in archaic English. We still use the same word, of course, in the Our Father. When we say, hallowed be thy name, we're using the same word that we use in Halloween. It's a word for holiness. And it refers to the fact that the day after Halloween is the feast of all the saints, all of the holy ones.
It's a very surprising discovery, but it's true. Halloween is a Catholic feast, and Father John Walk has more evidence to prove it.
But even the date on which we celebrate Halloween and the Feast of All Saints has to do with Rome, actually. It was a pope in the 8th century who dedicated a chapel in the old Basilica of St. Peter's to all the saints. And he moved the Feast of All the Saints to November 1st because that was the date of the dedication of this chapel in St. Peter's Basilica.
If Halloween is a Catholic feast, why then do the celebrations often have to do with pagan and Gothic themes?
The custom of dressing up for Halloween probably has its roots in two different ancient customs. One is simply guising, which was a medieval custom. Usually it was done by children who would dress up in different costumes, and they would go door to door asking for sweets. The other custom has to do with frightening off evil spirits, and that's where you would have the justification for dressing up in frightening costumes.
So there are two traditions, a medieval one and a Celtic one, intertwined with celebration of All Saints' Eve. It was probably immigrants of Anglo-Saxon origins who brought these traditions over to the United States, from where the custom of dressing up spread throughout the world.
Halloween ought to be celebrated, right? In all its innocence. There's nothing wrong with kids dressing up in different costumes and going around trick-or-treating. It's actually a delightful thing. But without forgetting its connection with the Feast of All Saints, right? And the next day, and taking seriously that it's the vigil of a great feast day. And reminding ourselves, and especially children, so that they grow up aware of the true meaning of Halloween.
There's another connection between the Solemnity of All Saints and the city of Rome. The origins of the Feast of All Saints date back to the 7th century, when Pope Boniface IV decided to consecrate the ancient pagan temple of all gods, the Pantheon, as the Christian church dedicated to Mary and all the martyrs. The Pope didn't pick the date accidentally. On May the 13th, ancient Romans used to celebrate a feast in honor of their dead. So Christians turned this day into a celebration of their glorified dead, in other words, the saints. Thanks to this fact, the Pantheon remains today one of the best preserved ancient Roman buildings in the world that's still in use. Thanks for watching. Stick around for more on Vaticano. Welcome back. You're watching Vaticano. The Feast of All Saints on November the 1st is followed the next day by the Feast of All Souls. It's the time when people visit cemeteries and pray for their dead relatives. Christian tradition says that life after death is divided into 3 dimensions. Hell, the place for people who have rejected God. Heaven for those who are in friendship with God. And then purgatory. But what is this place called purgatory? To discover that, we met up with Father John Walk, professor of literature and communication of the faith, to discover how purgatory began being represented.
The tradition of purgatory is based on above all, on texts in the Bible, in the Old Testament, and then also in the writings of the early church fathers about prayers for the dead, about the value of praying for the dead. And that's a very ancient, or the very first Christians talk about praying for the souls of those who have died. And it only makes sense to pray for the souls who have died if you can do some good for them, right? If they were in hell, you couldn't, and if they're in heaven, they don't need your help.
The Church of the Sacred Heart of Suffrage is a very particular church. It's the only church in Rome built in the Neo-Gothic style. But what makes it really special is a small room located next to the sacristy. It's a small museum of the Holy Souls of Purgatory.
The Church doesn't have any official teaching about whether souls of purgatory can visit the earth, but there are witnesses who have testified to that happening, that a soul from purgatory has come and asked for prayers, for instance, and even left, say, a fingerprint or burned a page of a book or something. There's physical evidence that they claim came from a soul in purgatory.
The museum contains around 15 testimonies and artifacts collected from around Europe by Father Victor Jouet, a French priest. In many of the cases, it's held that the marks were left as proof that the deceased had really appeared, asking for prayers for masses to be said for their soul's sake. Father Andrea is a member of the Missionaries of the Sacred Heart, the community that's in charge of this church and the museum.
Nel 1895 da un nostro confratello.
This church was built in 1895 by one of our fellow brothers. one of the first members of our congregation, Father Jouet, who believed in the souls of purgatory. He would always spur people to pray in suffrage of these souls.
E che spronava sempre le persone a pregare per il suffragio di queste anime.
The idea for the construction of the museum also came from Father Jouet. The original chapel before the construction of this beautiful church was dedicated to the souls of purgatory as well. It had an icon of Holy Mary holding a rosary in one of her hands with the souls of purgatory below. When this original chapel caught fire, the icon survived, and on the left-hand side of the wall, the scorched image of a man appeared, which the faithful believed to be a trapped soul.
Praticamente la parte che è stata di muro della cappella, che poi è stata integrata all'interno del...
This is a part of the original chapel later incorporated into the walls of the church. And here you can see a suffering face. It's nearly all faded. You can see the eye on this face, and it is, if you will, suffering. And this very same face is found inside the museum, in its original colors.
L'immagine dipinta che c'è all'interno del piccolo museo, proprio perché lo richiama con gli stessi colori come è stato ritrovato dopo l'incendio.
Spurred on by this occurrence, Father Jouet started to travel around Italy and Europe in search of these many artifacts that would demonstrate to people the existence of purgatory. The collection thus gathered is kept in one room near the sacristy of the Church of the Sacred Heart of Suffrage. Here are many documents and photos that attest to the supernatural manifestations of the souls of the dead. Among these relics are a prayer book with an alleged handprint on one of its pages, a pillowcase branded by the soul of a nun who died of consumption in 1984, and who later appeared to another nun to convince her to pray for her soul's sake. And there are many others, including the traces left by the passage of a dead woman on the cap of her widowed husband in 1875.
Praticamente questa donna apparve al marito e...
Basically, this woman appeared to her husband and asked him to pray in suffrage of her soul, because she said she was in this situation of suffering, not able to leave purgatory.
Di sofferenza perché non riusciva a uscire dal purgatorio, chiede preghiera.
These fingerprints on the prayer book of Maria Zaganti of the parish of St. Andrew in Poggio Berni in Italy were left by the deceased Palmira Rastelli, the parish priest's sister, on March the 5th, 1871. Palmira Rastelli, who had died on the 28th of December 1870, asked her brother Don Sante Rastelli, by means of her friend, for some holy masses.
Artistic representations of purgatory have been various. Sometimes it's presented as fire, and the theologians have also talked about the fires of purgatory. But the most famous representation of purgatory in art is Dante's Purgatorio. In the Divine Comedy, which is divided into three parts, the Inferno for hell, the Paradiso for heaven, and then Purgatorio, which is purgatory. And Dante doesn't represent it as fire at all. In fact, in the Dante's version of Purgatorio, it's a mountain. And it's a mountain on the other side of the world. From the inhabited part of the world, it's on the opposite side of the world. And it has 7 levels, terraces, that correspond to the 7 capital sins.
There's a painting behind the altar of the Church of the Sacred Heart of Suffrage, and it represents the 3 dimensions of the Church.
The Catholic Church has always understood itself to be divided in 3 parts, right? There's the Church militant, which is the Church on earth, those who are in life, right? And then there is the Church triumphant, and those are the souls who are in heaven. And the third part are the souls in purgatory, the Church suffering.
Che durante la messa si rende visibile un'altra dimensione. Durante la messa,
during Mass, the repetition of the sacrifice of Christ brings relief to these souls. And when Mass is celebrated, the whole communion of the saints is present, and all the souls, and all the invisible reality. And so there you have represented this passage experienced by the souls. Through Mass, from a state of suffering, They slowly change their expression and their appearance until, through Jesus, they become the same as God.
Delle anime che prima da uno stato di sofferenza.
Purgatory is the temporary place of hope and purification of souls. It's the exact opposite of hell. It's possible that most of the church is actually in purgatory right now. Praying for the church in purgatory is one of the spiritual works of mercy. Join us next week on Vaticano and discover how missionaries work in Papua New Guinea. Thanks for watching.